Let's get the display of user details back into the application. What I want to happen is that when the user clicks on search or there's an automatic search, I want the URL to change to /user/ and then the GitHub login ID, like Angular. I want that in the URL for two reasons. One reason is that it makes it very easy to pass a parameter from this view and controller to another view and controller by putting data into the URL. And the second reason that this makes sense is because by having that login ID in the URL, someone can bookmark that URL and come back to it anytime and see details about a specific GitHub user. They could also copy that URL and email it to a friend or a coworker who can follow the link, and they'll see the same data as the first person. And in order for all of this to work, we'll need to go through 4 steps. First of all, we'll need to register a new route so that the routing provider understands when we go to /user/username what it needs to do. Then we'll need to create a template for that URL. We'll need to create a controller for that URL. And finally, we'll need the main controller to send us to that particular URL when a search occurs. Let's start all of this by working with the route provider to define that new URL. So as you've probably already deduced, .when is the API to use to register a route for your application. And you can have as many calls to .when as you want, and you can chain them together like this. So I can just say .when, 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 and then a .otherwise at the end if you want to handle unknown URLs. This time I want a URL that looks like /user/ username. So whenever the routing provider sees a segment of the URL with a colon in front, it's going to treat that piece of the URL as a parameter, a piece of data that needs to be extracted from the URL and perhaps given to other components so that they know what to search for or what to look for. Everything else it treats as a literal string. So for this particular route, it has to start with /user, USER, and then a slash, and whatever comes afterwards will be treated as a username parameter. So it could be /Angular or /Rob Connery. Whatever the value is, we'll be able to ask the routing engine what is the value for username, and it will be able to tell us what's in the URL. We'll see how to do that in just a bit. For right now, I want to tell the router what to do when we have reached this particular URL. Well, the template, I want it to use something called user.html. We'll have to create that. And the controller will be user controller. We have already created user controller, but remember that was a copy of the original main controller, so it has a lot of functionality in there that we needed to take out. All it needs to do now is display user details, so we need to fix up that file. Now let's create the template, user.html. It turns out we already have something that can display user details. We had it ng included into the main view as this file, userdetails.html. I can use this. All I need to do is rename it. Let me double click the file, change its name to user.html, and maybe just a few little things to clean up here. We no longer need to ID a particular element. We're not going to scroll there anymore. And I might need a place to display errors if something goes wrong when we search for a user. So those 2 little simple changes, everything else in here is perfectly set up to display the user details that we need. So now I just need to fix up usercontroller.js, which we have not included as a script in the application as yet because it hasn't been ready. But now I will go ahead and say, please bring in usercontroller.js. That can appear anywhere in this list as long as it is after the app.js script. And user controller itself, we will have to change the name here to just user controller instead of main controller. And down here where I register this controller, I want to register a controller by the name user controller. And please use this function when you need a user controller. Now we can clean up inside of here. This user controller no longer needs an interval service or a log service or anchor scroll or location. I'm going to get rid of all of those. It's going to be a much simpler controller. We do need to know when the user search is complete, when the repository search is complete, when there's an error, but we don't have to manage countdowns or start the countdown timer or perform a search. We don't need any of that. We don't need a message. All we really need to do is find out what is the username we're searching for, and then we need to search for it. So how do we find out the username? Well, there is a service available called route params when you're using routing. And what route params will give you is any parameter that is defined in the URL. So if our route has something called username, which is a parameter in the URL, if that's available, route params will make that available as a property that I can read. So I can say the username we're going to look for is route params dot username. That gives me the username. And now I can say GitHub service. Let's get the user scope.username. And when that is complete, use the existing onUserComplete function or the error function that we already have defined. And there's actually two more pieces of code that I can delete here. The feature that we had to scroll to the HTML element with an ID of user details, we don't need that anymore because this page will only display user details. Now the user controller is nice and simple. We removed a lot of code because the user controller is only focused on one responsibility, which is to display those user details. Now all the application needs is a way to get to this user controller and user view. We left that until later. That's the line of code that I left commented out here. I need to move to a particular route from the code inside of a controller. How do I do that? I do that with the location service. Not only can the location service tell you what URL you are on, if you want to read the URL for some reason, but it can also tell the location service to move us somewhere else. I can do that with a method named path. So I can say location.path, please take us to /user/ and then the username that our user searched for. Let's try this out by looking at it in an external preview window. Notice we start at /main. I do a search and we go to /user/angular and our repository information displays. And now it might be nice when I'm on this page to be able to get back to the search page. Currently we have no navigation here to get back and do another search. That's easy enough to add over in user.html. The other way to move between routes is to use a simple anchor tag. So I could say, please give me an anchor tag that points to /main, and the text will be back to search. And by the time I flip over to the preview window, that might have already refreshed so that if I scroll down, I have back to search. And here I am on the search window. I can do a search for Angular again. The other thing that will be working will be the back and forward buttons in the browser, because every time you make a route change, the routing engine will make an entry into the browser history list. And although this preview window does not display the UI for a back and forward button, it gets rid of the browser toolbar. There's always shortcut keys, like on Windows, I can hit Alt back arrow. That takes me back to the search form, Alt forward arrow. I'm back to displaying the user details of Angular. And that's another nice benefit of routing for your users, because many users like to use those back and forward buttons to move between screens that they've seen.